Hi, welcome to Lit It Up with Rajeshwari Kalyanam. We are with Amish Tripathi, the author who has got some of the best-selling books Indian publishing industry has seen in the recent times. And I had met Amish Tripathi many years ago during the launch of his first book, Immortals of Meluha, in Hyderabad. Standing there during a break, unassuming, approachable, extremely friendly, and always ready to answer whatever questions you asked him. And since then, I've met him many times, and he has sold so many millions of books, and he's seen so much of success, but nothing has changed. He's the same approachable, friendly, and ready to answer any question we ask. So welcome,
Thank
Amish.
you.
Welcome to our interview.
Thank you so much,
Let me tell our
Rajeshwari.
viewers.
Thank you. Thank you so much for a very kind introduction.
No, you deserve all that. Plus, of course, Amish has kindly agreed to talk to us from UK, where he's extremely busy. He's right now taken up his position as a Minister for Culture and Indian High Commission in the UK and Director of Nehru Center of Arts. That's right. So, how is the new position treating you? You've always complained of lack of time. Now, how are you dealing with it now?
No, I'm a workaholic. So this role is it's an honor. It's a privilege. One gets an opportunity to contribute to a culture and a land that I truly love, which is Mother India. The Nehru Center is India's biggest cultural center abroad. It is, what the British Council is in India. The Nehru Center is the Indian equivalent of that in the UK. And it's our biggest cultural center anywhere in the world. It's a huge opportunity on building the Indian narrative in the UK and in the larger West because of the cultural footprint of the UK into the Anglosphere and through there to the entire world. And to drive the Indian narrative, to popularize Indian culture. So it's a privilege and an honor. We have our own heritage building in the heart of London, in Mayfair. That's where I'm speaking to you from. So I'm delighted to do this, but of course it means that I am even more strained for time.
So it's lovely to be speaking to you just ahead of Indian Independence Day, and we will also talk about your journey as a writer, where you have made a genre, where a slot for yourself in the publishing industry at a time when Indian writers, people were asking about what about Indian writers and what about Indian fiction, and you created this genre called mythological fiction. And how has been the journey, and what have been the most important takeaways from this journey, from the Immortals of the Shiva trilogy, which was the best-selling and the fastest-selling series that you've had, and the Ramachandra series, and your current book, of course, the Suhel Dev. This is a new book which we are going to talk extensively about. Yeah.
It's a bit like fate or my heart kind of just propelled me forward, and the path just got made. I wasn't planning anything. I wasn't thinking that I'll drive a new genre. I don't think I have also, frankly. Mythology is the English word that we use for it. It's the limitations of the English language. The word we would use in Sanskrit or any Indian language would be itihasa. That's how we refer to our ancient stories. Thus it happened. And it's a story of the stories of our ancients, of our culture. I've always been deeply connected to our roots, and I think most Indians have. Actually, practically all Indians have. I think the demand for such books was always there. It's just that the supply wasn't there for whatever reason. We can debate what the reasons were. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I think.
Yeah. So I also asked you any great takeaways, because you, as a banker turned author from the first time to now, what has been the most important takeaways from this journey as a person for you?
From my banking experience?
No. I said from your writing experience, from the first book till now, your takeaway as a person, as an individual, as an author.
The last 10 years have had their own, it's been a journey. I never thought I would be leading this kind of a life. I thought, excuse me, if someone had told me 10, 15 years back that I'd be a writer, and I'd be making a living from it, I would have probably laughed. Um, and I have the journey has been so wildly divergent. I was a banker for 14 years, and I was that because that was a pragmatic thing to do, considering I had a middle class background, not that much money. Uh, as the joke goes, बाप दादा का आशीर्वाद है, जायदाद कुछ नहीं है. And then from there to become a full-time writer, where I was making more money from writing than I did as a banker. I never thought that was possible. And now I'm a diplomat. So my life has been one wild ride after another. So it's been an interesting journey. Last 10 years have been transformational on the career space. And usually God has been kind on the career. Things have gone, every year has been better than the previous year in terms of the career. But personal life has had a lot of challenges. Last 3-4 years have been very difficult. So, but I guess that's the way, in the Indian way we believe that the universe always strives for balance. So if you get maybe more blessings than you deserve in one area, which is the career, then maybe then the personal life, to balance it out, you will get more grief than you deserve. It's the way the world balances itself.
Yeah, that's how we look at it. That's been the philosophy, Indian philosophy of life, I suppose. And also, before going to Suhail Dev, your new book, I would like to talk about your, I mean, this is probably you've told us before also, but let's just, in this context, can you talk to us about history versus mythology, which is always a kind of an argument that's there whenever it's talked about in that context. What is your take? Because you have written taking from history and mythology both.
Madhab, the difference between history and mythology?
Difference and your takeaway as in how do you perceive history and mythology? It's all about you.
This debate comes more from the Western and Middle Eastern paradigm. Because there's a strange affliction out there of people claiming that they know the truth. And there is only one truth. And if you don't accept that truth, then you'll suffer in hell. You'll burn in hell forever. And it's a very silly, childish approach, frankly. Our ancestors never believed that anyone has a monopoly on truth. And that if you don't agree with his truth, then God will punish you. I mean, why will God do that? It's childish. And our ancestors believed that there is only one subject where truth is possible, and that subject is mathematics. Because in mathematics, regardless of your personal paradigm, the truth is the truth. Like 2 + 2 is 4. Your personal experience, your personal background, your observer bias means nothing. 2 + 2 is 4. That's mathematics. In every other subject, there is no absolute truth possible. That's what our ancestors believed. The debate between history and mythology, again, it comes from the Western paradigm because they believe that history is the truth and mythology is not true. Right? That's what they believe. Now, if you see, I mean, even scientists, like in theoretical physics, they are accepting now that there is no absolute truth. There is your truth and there's my truth, because our observer bias defines the truth that we see. And our ancestors believed that there is no absolute truth, at least not in our experience, us as human individuals. Perhaps at the divine level, maybe there is absolute truth, but us, we have no experience of what absolute truth is. So therefore, the debate itself doesn't arise that this is the truth and this is not true, because everything is defined by your observer bias. I'm in London right now. Let me give you an, because history is supposed to be the truth, But let me give you an example of history where a different observer bias can have different interpretations on the very same facts. For the British, for example, Winston Churchill is a hero, rightly so, right? Because he defended UK from Nazi Germany. Fair enough, they have every right to see him as a hero. But for Indians, Winston Churchill is a monster, right? In fact, Indians can rightly say that Winston Churchill was worse than Hitler because Hitler didn't kill any Indians. Hitler was a horrible man, I'm not denying that. He killed some Jews, triggered the First World War, but he didn't kill any Indians. But Winston Churchill killed more than 3 million Indians in a man-made famine that he ordered to protect his precious empire. He killed 3 million of our fellow Indians. So then for us Indians, he is a monster and worse than Hitler. Hitler didn't kill any Indians. Now, whose truth is right? Is the British truth right or is the Indian truth right? Both truths are right, defined by your background. And this is in the subject of history. Now, this is true in every sphere, right? Only in mathematics is absolute truth possible. If you accept this, then what debate between history and mythology? History is like that immature child, screaming and shouting, my truth is the truth. Whereas mythology is like the mature adult saying, this is my truth. You find your truth, bhai. And you don't force your truth on me. I won't force my truth on you. Right? So, which is why you'll find that in the Sanskrit term, itihasa, it doesn't have that judgmentalism that history has. Itihasa doesn't claim that this is the only way it happened, and if you disagree with me, you will burn in hell for eternity. Don't claim that. Correct? So I'm saying this debate in the Indian context is actually pointless. It's a debate in the Western concept, and in my view, a very childish debate, because who can claim a monopoly on truth? Only someone who's utterly ignorant. The moment you become wise, you realize there are multiple truths.
Absolutely. So also before coming to your book again, let me also ask you, since you must have researched a lot, read a lot about history and mythology in the context of writing your books, where do you think has India gone wrong in putting across history to the people of India?
The question is
not
not
right or wrong or right. Yeah.
The question is not that where has India gone wrong, or our establishment historians, where have they gone wrong? I think the question is where have they not gone wrong? Okay. Very rarely have they got things right, and I'll tell you where the problem is. The problem is not with the facts. The problem is their observer bias. We were just speaking of observer bias defines the truth that you see. Sanjeev Sanyal had said very rightly, the history that is taught to us is more the history of our invaders rather than our own history. We study the foreigners who attacked us, not our ancestors who defended us from those foreigners. Okay? Mahmud Ghori, Alauddin Khilji, Babur, they were not Indians, they were foreigners. And they were Turks from Central Asia. Indian movies have added to the confusion because in the Indian mind, we think Alauddin Khilji looks like Ranveer Singh. I've cracked this joke often. No, he did not look like Ranveer Singh. To us, he would have looked Chinese. Okay, Akbar did not look like Prithviraj Kapoor or Hrithik Roshan. To us, he would have looked Chinese. Okay, just like when we show a British guy, a British colonial ruler, we're very clear. We always show him as a Gora. It's clearly a foreigner. Why do we show Hema Malini for Razia Sultan? There's no way Razia Sultan would have looked like Hema Malini. Should have looked Chinese to us. They were Turks from Central Asia. They did not speak Urdu. Okay, Urdu is an Indian language. They spoke Turkic or Persian. We wouldn't have understood anything of what they were saying. Just like we won't understand anything, and most ordinary Indians, except those who studied English, wouldn't understand what the British colonial masters were saying when they spoke in English. But it wasn't our language at that time. Right? And even today, most Indians, English though many of us understand, Turkic and Persian though even today most Indians don't understand. Yeah. Right? So here they made a mistake that we don't cover our ancestors, we cover more our invaders. So that is why King Suheldev has to be introduced through my book. Whereas a hero as consequential as him should have been known to everyone.
Yeah,
right?
that was going to
This
be
is the
my
first
next
problem.
question.
The second problem is the obsession of our establishment historians with Delhi. Okay. All of them, and this question should be asked by all Indians. I'm not reducing the importance of Delhi. It's a very important city. I'm not saying that, but there are other important regions in India too. Delhi is not the only part, no, of India. And this question should be asked by South Indians, by East Indians, by West Indians, by people from beyond Western UP also, UP, Bihar. We should ask questions to Romila Thapar, to D.N. Jha, that why did you ignore everything away from Delhi? Okay, it's one of the reasons King Suhaildev was ignored. Rajendra Chola, one of the greatest Indian emperors whose empire was bigger than Emperor Akbar's. Okay, you wouldn't assume that because of the way history has been taught to you. But Rajendra Chola's empire was bigger than Emperor Akbar's.
You did mention, he does come into you the book also, which was very gladdening for a South Indian because, yeah.
Yeah, so many have been ignored. The Hoysalas from South, the Rashtrakutas, the Satavahanas, the Kakadiyas, the Kalingas of Odisha, they had impacted Southeast Asia quite a lot. The Palas, the Buddhist Palas of Bengal, the Gurjar Pratiharas of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Raja Bhoj of Madhya Pradesh, the Sikhs have been ignored, the Ahoms have been ignored, the Sindh, the Hindu Shahis of Afghanistan have been ignored. Anyone, I don't know if it strikes you, then read our history books. Anyone who did not have a base in Delhi has been wiped out from our history books, except if the empire was too big to ignore. The Mauryas and the Guptas, because the Mauryas were the biggest empire the subcontinent has ever had in human history. They were too big to ignore. Their base was Bihar, but they were too big to ignore, so they were covered. The Guptas were also many times actually bigger than the Mughal Empire also. Again, too big to ignore, even though their base was Bihar, not Delhi, so they've been covered. But you notice everyone else, the Marathas are the fourth biggest empire in the Indian subcontinent ever. Okay. Again, you wouldn't know that if the way history books have been written. Why? Because Maratha base was not Delhi. Maratha base was Maharashtra. Okay, so almost every empire which did not have a base in Delhi has been wiped out of our history books. Okay, it's a heavy Delhi bias and historians like Romila Thapar, D.N. Jha, all of them, they have to answer why this obsessive Delhi bias. Mughals are very big, I understand, they should be covered. But Lodhis were glorified zamindars. Why do they have to be covered? And it's not a Hindu-Muslim thing. You read the Adil Shahis, for example, of the Deccan. It's forgotten that after the fall of Vijayanagar, the biggest city in the Indian subcontinent for many decades was actually Bijapur. Most Indians don't know this. It wasn't Delhi. It certainly wasn't Agra. It wasn't Lahore. It was Bijapur. So it was not and Adil Shahis are Muslims. But Adil Shahis made one critical error according to our establishment historians, that they never conquered Delhi. So they've been wiped out from our history books. Okay. This is a bias that has to be set right. The obsession of our Lutyens historians with Delhi. We have to cover other parts of India too. Only then do we get a complete holistic understanding of India. Like we Indians believe that we were always a land-based agrarian culture. Not true. We were actually the greatest traders for most of human history. But since all Western, Eastern, Southern empires have been ignored, we don't know that because of the obsession with Delhi. Right? So this has to be set right.
Yeah, which thankfully I think right now current generation, I was just reading Manu Pillai's book, which also talked about Adil Shahs, and that's how we learned a lot of things from the book. And I am hoping at least from now onwards, when India is looking into itself, be it Make in India or be it look towards our culture, yes, we need to actually focus on these other parts of history. So coming to Suhaildev, you said, yes, Suhaildev, where did you find him and how did it happen?
You know, King Suhaildev is from Shravasti, which is close to Ayodhya, which is in Uttar Pradesh. And my family's roots are in Uttar Pradesh, in Kashi, Varanasi. My father's family. It's from Varanasi. My mother's family is from Gwalior. So I have roots in, and I have spent large parts of my life in Maharashtra. I was born in Mumbai. So I have roots in these three states. I spent a lot of time in Odisha as well, some parts in West Bengal, some parts in Tamil Nadu, but these are my. So even someone who has roots in UP, I had not heard of King Suheldev till a few years ago, some 6 years ago. And I heard of him at a conference in Goa, where there were two friends of mine, two scholars who are friends of mine. Abhinav Prakash, who's a professor in Delhi University, and Sanjeev Sanyal, who is the principal economic advisor to the government of India, and also a scholar. He writes history books. And they told me of the story of King Suheldev, and I was fascinated, right, and inspired that, wow, what the most consequential Indian hero of the last 1,000 years who you've not heard of. And at the same time, I was saddened that, boss, I have roots in UP. I have not heard of him. You know, and like, what the hell is our education system? And outside UP, almost no one has heard of him. So I decided I must, bring his story out. And so that's where the journey began. Now, if you think about the story, it is so inspiring. A king from a subaltern caste, okay, a Hindu, a Shiv Bhakt from a subaltern caste, unites Hindus of all castes, brings Indian Muslims, Indian Buddhists together, forges an army together, and destroys the most fearsome foreign invaders the world has ever seen. The Turkic people were the military superpowers from the 11th to the 16th, 17th century, and the most fearsome invaders the world has ever seen. And Ghaznavid Turks were one of the tribes of the Turks. Okay. And he defeated them so badly, didn't leave one man alive, killed every single one, that forget the Ghaznavid Turks, no other Turkic tribe came back to India for 160 years. Should we know such a man's story? Such an inspiring story, a lesson of unity, of pride, of resistance. But he's been airbrushed out of our history books. Because he never ruled Delhi, I guess.
Yeah. So, did you not ever think that this ruler, yes, you had put it again in your own genre of mythological fiction, or rather now historical fiction. So, did you not feel tempted to write a book of history? I mean, proper history.
I have to make it very clear. I'm not a scholar.
Yeah.
Look, a scholar's job is to study primary sources, which could be texts written in Sanskrit, Pali, Tamil, Turkic, Persian, the primary sources, or study folk traditions. These are all primary sources. And write a scholarly book. Right? Those scholarly books are called secondary sources. Right? And our job as storytellers or as public intellectuals is to study those works of those scholars, those secondary sources, and then make them mass through stories or articles. Right? So my job is to study the work of the scholars. I am not good enough to study the primary sources. I am hoping, though, that with this book and hopefully the popularization of King Suheldev, Prime Minister Modi, Honorable Prime Minister Modi spoke of King Suheldev recently in his speech. I hope some scholars would get interested in going King Suheldev's story, would study the primary sources and write a scholarly book on him. We deserve to know his true story.
Absolutely. And even the war, I think, at least we have not heard of the most important war, and you mentioned it here, an unforgettable battle, but I think it's very important to learn about the battle. So basically, when you fictionalized him, what did you ensure was there as probably as a character sketch, or Suheldev, or basically you probably must have got bits and pieces from here and there. I mean, how did that characterization happen?
Yeah, look, the Battle of Bahraich is one of the most consequential wars that we've not heard of. It was fought in 1034 by King Suheldev and the Ghaznavid Turks on the other side. You get snatches of information. But what I tried to do is build a bit on some of the folk traditions that I've heard, some texts written a few centuries later, Rati Masudi, etc., and added in a bit of my, which is the way historical fiction works, added in a bit of my own imagination to truly bring out what I thought um, was the message of King Suhail. Because for me, a story is about is a wrapper for some philosophies I want to do. And what are the core philosophies that emerge from King Suhail? One, we must be united. That if we are not, usually Indians have lost battles because of our internal divisions. Others haven't had to defeat us, we've defeated ourselves. But when we've been united, we've been freaking unbeatable. Right? So that's the first message, that we must be united, all of us Indians. Right? The second is philosophy that comes around from the ages, Shate Shatyam Samacharit, that you will fight with chivalry against an enemy who's himself being chivalrous. But if the enemy is not following rules, then you will talk to the enemy in a language that the enemy understands. You will be as ruthless, if not more ruthless than the enemy. And that was King Suhail Dev's approach. More Lord Krishna than Lord Ram's approach. Right? Yeah, because, and the Turks were ruthless people, ruthless invaders who never followed any rule. Okay. Raping women, killing innocents, no norms of battle. Not that King Suhail Dev would do that in return, but he would be as ruthless to the Turks. Nothing like defeating them and now you go back, I will let you go free. His attitude was, I will kill every single one of you. Not one person will go back alive. Okay, because his approach was, if the enemy is so ruthless, I have to be even more ruthless with them, so that they learn. He still, but, and that's a third thing, that how do you find the balance between this? Right? That often the problem in battling a monster is the fear that you yourself will become a monster in battling that monster. Right? So that, for one of those key things for King Suhail Dev was very clear, that we cannot afford to lose our dharma. And dharma is not religion. Dharma is the right way to be. Right? That we cannot lose our dharma just because we are fighting monsters. Right? So he would be as ruthless with them. Right? But only with the warriors. No question of ever hurting a Turkic child. There's an incident I show where there's a Turkic child, and King Suhail Dev is very kind and gentle with that child. No question of hurting an unarmed citizen. Right? No question of hurting a woman who's not a part of the battle. Okay? So he would follow his dharma, but when he was battling the Turkic soldiers themselves, complete and total ruthlessness. Total ruthlessness. They should be afraid of him. At the end, the main villain tells King Suhail Dev that you have to treat me according to your rules, according to your dharma. And King Suhail Dev says, don't defile those words with your tongue. You have no right to our rules, because you didn't behave with rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
which is
these
the other
three
character
things:
which you are very
unity, fight ruthlessness with ruthlessness, but keep your core dharma. There are some lines, we are Indians. There are some lines we will not cross. No question of hurting innocent people. No question of hurting unarmed people. No question of hurting women who have nothing to do in the battle. If they are women warriors, it's a different point. Right? We must follow those rules and codes.
So your answer gave me another question which I will ask, but I would like to know if any other character you would like to talk about in the book, because the book is full of beautiful, amazing characters. There's Aslan, there's a lot of others. So would you like to talk about any other character apart from Suhail Dev, which is close to your heart, or which you think?
So many of them, yeah. Govardhan, for example, who's a big burly Kshatriya related to the Tomar clan, who's inspired by King Suhail Dev and who comes under his leadership. And he doesn't care that he is a Kshatriya and King Suhail Dev is from a subaltern caste. Brishab, for example, who's a Brahmin prime minister of an enemy kingdom and works for King Suhail Dev for the good of India. Abdul, an Indian Muslim, who's willing to sacrifice his life for Mother India. Toshani, a woman, fighting hard Ashwa Ghosh and Sangamani, Buddhists,
Oh,
sworn
that
to
was brilliant.
non-violence, right? But and they believe that if we carry out violence, we will lose our chance at moksha. But then they say moksha can wait. First, we have to defend our country. So I think many of these characters kind of build the message that is important.
So we will also have had a lot of tips with our neighbors, especially Pakistan. In fact, that is ironical considering that we have so much of shared history. And this takes me back to your earlier comment about how we have ignored a lot of our own history. So do you think for refocus on our own histories from our own perspective will kind of pave way for a more friendlier relationships?
Now, I think a focus on our own history is to be clear on who we are, so that we can emerge as a. Right now, by global sweepstakes, we are a middle power. To be honest, America is a superpower, but we have the potential to be a superpower. Hopefully, in another decade. What kind of country should we have? What kind of people should we be, so that we can emerge that way, and more importantly, that we will be a good superpower. Okay, that's the debate that I am focused on as far as India is concerned, which is why knowing who we are is very critical, because our education system sadly cuts us off from who we are. As far as Pakistan is concerned, the Pakistani citizens are the biggest victims of the Pakistani state. It's a narco-terrorist criminal state. As former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright had said, Pakistan is an international migraine. And the two centerpieces of the Pakistani state is the drug running business and radical terrorism. And they're also confused about who they are, because their roots are actually the Indian subcontinent. But they somehow like to believe they're descendants of Mahmud Ghazni, and I've heard many. And the state propagates that myth. I don't know if the people believe it. But I mean, you don't have to do genetic tests to disprove that. I mean, they just have to look in the mirror. Do they look Turk? I mean, you look Indian. Hello.
Absolutely.
But I mean, that's their journey. They have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry to interrupt. We are running time. So
Yeah, I
try
just
and
have
wrap in
one
This can be the last question.
Yeah,
5 minutes.
I think they just have one more question because he's answered all the questions without asking. Just one more question, or two questions rather. One, Amish, is that you have spoken about this Immortals Writers Center, and you've spoken in elaborately about it in the preface of your book about how you have got this together with a bunch of writers. Can you quickly tell us about what this whole concept is? I thought it was very innovative and very interesting rather.
The idea is very simple. As you know, I'm a workaholic, but despite that, I have limitations to my capacity. It takes me 1.5 to 2 years between books, and I already have story ideas for at least around 25 series, not books, series, in my mind. Until now, I've completed only 1.5 series. Lord Shiva has blessed me with more stories than the capacity to write. And at the rate that I write, I'll probably die before I finish all my stories. So, and which I don't want to do. So therefore, this was an idea from my team that how about if we have a writer's center where we hire published writers, and I tell them the story and they write the first draft, and then I write the second draft, as I've explained in my forward. I write the second draft and finalize the manuscript. What this does essentially is expands my capacity. Yeah. So I'll be able to come out with more books. I have many non-fiction ideas as well, not just fiction. I simply don't have the capacity to write. So this is.
You're working on anything else?
Yeah. So I'm working on the 4th book of the Ramchandra series, 5th of the way through, hoping to release that second half next year. There are 2 fiction books being worked upon at this point of time through the Writers Center, and 2 non-fiction books as well.
Okay, wonderful. Amish, that was amazing talking to you. I just wanted to ask you one final question because we have to ask one small difficult question or rather easy question for you. In today's politically driven environment and an active environment, where do you, and people always assign a certain side to you, left, right, center, where do you see which part of the scale you are in?
I'm an Indian. I'm a very, very proud Indian. I'm a
Yes.
very, very proud uh, proud Indian who's deeply proud of our roots and who's deeply liberal because that's what our ancient culture teaches us. That means I'm not wholly a part of any side. I'm Indian.
Wonderful. So a happy Independence Day to you and to me and to all
Happy
of us.
Independence Day to you as well.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day and best of luck in all
Bye.
you do.